Okay, that should mean we are live. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. This is BrisJS, and we are now in November. So thank you very much for joining us there. I'm seeing the viewer count go up. That means we've got everyone online. Thanks for joining us tonight and live. Do feel free to share the link out after we're all done with everyone else when you've got the stream playback link available to you. I'll be on the chat tonight, and I'll also give some information about Slido, where you can ask questions and we can have a Q&A feedback round at the end of the talk. I can see that everyone's jumping on very quickly here, so I'm not going to delay really. I'll jump straight into leaving this up for a second. You can hop on to slido.com, and that's the thing I just mentioned, where you can go and ask questions and sort of post them asynchronously, and we don't have to interrupt. And then we'll collect all those, and I'll read them out to our speaker at the end of the session. And so hopefully that one's good. I'll paste that in the chats as well, just to make sure everyone's got the link. Okay, we were doing this at our in-person events, but I think it's just as important now. So while we're all distributed, it's a great idea to still acknowledge. Oops, hang on, sorry, we jumped a slide there. While we're all online, hang on, back. There we go. It's still a great idea to go and acknowledge those traditional owners of your location and pay respects to its elders past and present. So we're broadcasting from Yatala right now, which is bordering the country from the Yagara and Bundjalung peoples. It's still handy for me in terms of trying to get the word out and giving us an extra contact. If you RSVP to each month's meetup, it's a good idea to also RSVP one ahead, and that way you can stay in touch with any of the broadcasted emails that I send out to sort of give everyone the heads up about what's coming each month. So thank you for doing that if you've already done that. If you're new to our meetup group, please feel free to join. And go have a look. There's a whole bunch of very useful links and past talks on there as well that can be found, as well as in our YouTube and our BrisJS, which I'm going to talk about shortly. BrisJS.org, sorry. Code of conduct. Hey, we're online, but this is still really important, especially in our online chat spaces. So it's BrisJS is got a code of conduct policy. It's a harassment-free experience for everyone. Make sure you can abide by that, and everyone will be better for it. So this one's always super important, and that's why it's still highlighted in red. If you could please submit a talk for our upcoming months, that would be amazing. I know it's been really hard this year for everyone, and you know, submitting a talk to a virtual meetup, even if it's the meetup you know and love from your local area, Brisbane, and even if it's not, you get the opportunity to go and submit a talk from further afield. So please jump on this opportunity. It's a great community to share your ideas with, and everyone's super keen to hear your ideas as well. So one of the other options you've got there is to request to talk. So if there's some topic that you've been super keen on, feel free to pop that up there as well, and I'll tag it as a request. That will also then appear as a separate list in our BrisJS.org page website, and you will be able to then maybe give somebody else some inspiration if they wanted to do a talk but didn't know what to start with. Maybe they can see a topic to go do some research on. So that's really handy for everyone. We facilitate all these things through our BrisJS GitHub, and that's under the issues. So you can see that sort of demonstrated there from a historical screenshot. We go and tag those then and build up the list, and so that we can get confirmations for everything. So it's kind of just a process for building up the queue. And then you'll hopefully be aware of a whole bunch of our socials. So you're on YouTube, we're looking at Twitter, and if you're on Facebook, we've got one of those there too. Twitter's the most active one there of all of them, as well as, of course, YouTube for these live streams. If you need a couple of links and you're not sure where to go, BrisJS.org is a simple way to jump on there and see everything aggregated. So you can also have a link through to our jobs page, which is fed from our GitHub issues as well. You can post a job in there, and if you're in need of a job, please feel free to go and pursue those links that are on there. You'll be able to leave comments on the original posts in our GitHub issues board as well, to be able to get in contact with people who are advertising those positions. There's a few up there at the moment, and they're actively recruiting, including from our sponsors, which are Console Connect as part of PCCW Global. Thank you very much to these folks. I work for PCCW Global. I work in delivery and support, so another part of the global organization. It's got many facets. And so thank you very much for them to continue to sponsor our Zoom Pro subscription. That is what is bringing our faces to you right now. So thanks very much for that. They're also advertising some positions. Actually, you can join my team as a senior or mid JavaScript or web dev, full stack, back end, front end. We're interested to get in touch with you. So if you have a look at that TinyCC link, that'll actually take you to our LinkedIn page, but you can go check out that job first party straight up there on the BrisJS jobs board. And there's plenty of info there, and feel free to chat to me about it as well. It's a really, really cool team, so it'd be great to hear from you. Another cool sponsor has been giving us a giveaway to licenses to give away. It's the folks over at Wallaby, and they have been giving us Wallaby.js licenses and Quokka.js licenses. And this month is just the same. And thank you to Bronwyn Carr for last month submitting a correct answer. There was actually quite a few correct answers in that pool, so I had to initiate random.js, my terrible / very easy, basically random number generator that went and grabbed the first person from that list at hopefully as random as possible. Yeah, that we've got a winner. So I'm going to be sending out an email very soon, and you will get your license very soon. So congrats again. They are giving us more licenses ongoing. So thanks very much again, Wallaby. Again, they're keen to hear everyone on their Discord. So if you're into Discord, feel free to jump on there and ask them some questions, or give them some feedback on their products. They make some really cool sort of interactive tools for us developers. So they can sort of run your tests in the background and show the live results against your in your IDE, sort of inline, as well as inline evaluation with Quokka. Excuse me, too much talking. And we're going to do the same thing tonight. So we're going to give away another license tonight. So I will jump on the chat and actually go and say, here's our particular question. It'll be up as a poll on the Slido. So you can go and submit on the Slido. Okay, without further ado, tonight we have futuristic state management with GraphQL, Apollo, and Magic. And that's going to be presented by Tom Quirk. Thank you very much to Tom for jumping in today. And then we'll close and we'll do some more Q&A straight after that. Okay, I'm going to unmute you. You are unmuted. How are you doing, Tom?
Doing very well, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for the great introduction. I've never actually said the title out loud, and it kind of sounded a little bit ridiculous, but happy to be here and be presenting for you all today.
I have just noticed that I did not even screen share. So that was awesome. I just went through all these different slides and nobody saw a thing. So, you can tell I've totally done this many, many times, and still happens, right? That'll be fine. I'm going to go and give out those things to everyone later on as well. So I'm going to press on and let you do your talk, Tom.
All good. Let me share my screen to double check that I do it correctly. Okay. Okay, I think I'm sharing my screen. Cool. Yeah, well, thanks again, everyone. I'm actually not, I don't live in Brisbane anymore. I live in the Northern Territory now of Australia, but really, really happy to still kind of be involved in the community wherever I can. I think this is kind of cool that we get to do these remote meetups. So today I kind of wanted to do a talk. Basically, the title is Futuristic State Management with GraphQL, Apollo, and Magic. Essentially, it's just a bit of like a high-level overview on GraphQL, how you can integrate GraphQL into your existing front-end applications and how we're kind of doing that at GitLab a little bit. And also just a little few fun things that I've learned about the whole process along the way. So I started at GitLab about a year ago, and all this stuff was like totally new to me. So, and at the time it was very overwhelming, and it did honestly feel like there was a lot of magic involved. But when you realize the power of it, let me present. When you realize the power of it, I feel like you're kind of like Steve Harvey in this GIF, and it's kind of really cool. So let's press on. So our goals. So basically, I want to try to convince you in a really short amount of time that GraphQL is really awesome, not just from a developer happiness point of view, but also from a business and user experience point of view. We'll talk about state management and how we do it at GitLab with GraphQL, and also some things that I find really cool and awesome is client-side only GraphQL. So that's using GraphQL without a server. So as a little bit of a background, I guess, we all kind of know that JavaScript more or less ate the web world, and now we've got JavaScript across the whole stack. And I guess nowadays, our clients are so big, and we've got so much kind of state happening in these clients and so many user interactions that we need these frameworks like Angular and React and Vue. And I feel like more and more GraphQL it's kind of hungry, and it's almost eating the JavaScript world as well. And the more it does that, the more tools like Apollo are kind of needed. And we'll go into Apollo a bit later, but let's just give a quick 101 of GraphQL. So I stole this from the GraphQL website. Feel free to head there. But essentially, GraphQL is a query language for your API. So this screenshot is also from the website. We basically describe our data. So we say, okay, we've got a project with some attributes of a certain type. And then on the client side, they give us this GraphQL, this graph query language to query this server for the exact data that we want. And we get it back. The response that we get from this query is in a shape that we already know. Like we've defined the shape, and then we've got it in the shape that we want. And so I guess comparing to the kind of traditional approach, or when you have a REST API, let's say I'll use a GitLab example. We've got a GitLab project, so like a repository, and we want to list the issues for that alongside that project. So we've got a bunch of issues or tickets, some might call them. And so our first step would probably be to get the project at a certain ID. So we're getting project 1, 2, 3. That's one query that we're firing off. The next thing we do is we need a list of issues to display. And depending on how your API is set up, the data that comes back from this query might not actually be the full amount of data that you want. Like you might need some specific bit of data that isn't given in this response, for example. And so we might have our list of issues, but then we might need to iterate over that list and actually do a request for each issue. So, at the end of the day, we could be firing off a bunch of different queries, which isn't great for performance and is kind of just a little bit annoying, as I think Simon Cowell perfectly illustrates here. This is sometimes what I feel like these days when requesting data in this way. But the GraphQL way is pretty amazing, I think. So instead of kind of manually figuring out which parts of this data we need and which requests we need to fire off, and then at the end of the day, like mashing it all together into a data structure that we can actually use for our application, GraphQL just lets us define the exact data that we want to request in the shape that we want, and we'll get it back in that exact same way. So this is obviously a GraphQL query here. And we don't need to go into the kind of syntax of it, but essentially what we're doing is we're getting a project, we're getting the ID and the name of that project, and then we're going to get a list of issues. But for those list of issues, all we're going to request is the ID, the title, and the description. So back to the kind of, this is the first kind of Steve Harvey reaction that I had when learning GraphQL. And back to kind of the beauty of GraphQL and what GraphQL describes on their website, all it basically is a way for you to query what you want in a way that makes sense to a client-side application. So switching gears, let's talk a little bit about state management. So essentially, I mean, state management, it's kind of seems like a bit of a complex topic these days. Like there's a lot of different libraries that are doing this so-called state management. And I think it's evolved a lot. So really at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is make the state of our application maintainable from just a developer point of view and an engineering organization point of view. But also we're trying to improve the user experience of our application. And so really at the end of the day, the gist of it is we want to store some data on our client, and then we want to continually access it from different parts of our application. And that might be some derivative of it. So for example, in our issues example from earlier, we might have our whole list of issues, but maybe we only want to use the issues that are open or ready to be acted upon for our particular use case. So I guess like the really basic example, the hello world of state management is the old to-do application. And so I can save some time. This is the Redux documentation. So Redux is a library for doing state management. And they give this kind of canonical example of a to-do application where we've just got a list of to-dos and we want to add to that list and also toggle the list in this example. So, this is like an example of if you were to just do it like a plain old JavaScript. There's nothing involved here. The Redux way to do it is, we have these various cases that we want to manipulate our state in some way, all immutably, so we're not actually mutating state in this example. That's a topic for another day. But at the end of the day, that's all we're doing. We're just adding to our state. So here, we're adding a to-do, and then eventually we want to like get the to-dos, which it doesn't look like we have an example, but we want to query our state for maybe the to-dos that are still ready to be completed, for example. So back to our slides. And I mean, anytime I see these to-do examples, I kind of think, okay, that's really cool, but it's kind of the land of make-believe. Like I want to see how this actually works in a real application. So I'm going to try to give a quick example of how we might do that at GitLab. And for this example, so GitLab has this feature called boards. This isn't actually an area of the application that I work on, but I'm kind of familiar with it. So a board is essentially just a collection of issues. So, we've got a bunch of different issues here. This is the board for my team. And, different issues can be at different stages along this board. So it's essentially an overview of issues. So if we think about how we implement this with GraphQL, there's a few different approaches. And I guess what I forgot to mention earlier is that GitLab is a Vue-powered kind of product at this point. We use a lot of Vue throughout GitLab. This boards feature is entirely written in Vue. I'll try to steer away from the Vue concepts a little bit so that the stuff that we're talking about can be kind of generally applied. But nevertheless, let's push on. So the state management solution for Vue is called Vuex. And the first step for implementing this is we're going to need to get the data. So with GraphQL, that is simply a matter of we have a query and we want to basically do a post request to our GraphQL endpoint with that query string, and then our server, we're front-end developers, or at least I'm a front-end developer, so the server can handle passing that query and figuring out what data to give back to us. But all we need to do is give it this boards list query, which I probably should have got an example of, but essentially it's one of those one of these things that we had earlier, this post GraphQL endpoint. Let's quickly skip forward again. And that's it. So that's our first step. Our second step, so now that we've got our data, we need to persist it to our state management solution. In this case, we're using Vuex. So we've got our data, now we make this commit action, which is a Vuex thing. Essentially, it's just adding the data to our state, our global state. And finally, we need to actually use this data in our Vue component or in our React component or our Angular component. And so the way we do that is basically define a function at the end of the day is all it is that accepts the state and returns a subderivative of the state. So in this case, we'd accept our state object and we'd simply return the list of issues for that particular board and then render them in our Vue component. So that's pretty good. It definitely works, and that's what we do at GitLab. That's been the main approach, I guess, to integrating GraphQL at GitLab. GitLab uses a lot of Vuex prior to the adoption of GraphQL in the organization, and so we needed to essentially figure out a way to still, like, we wanted to move towards a GraphQL-centered approach, but we still had all this kind of Vuex code around. And so that's kind of the trade-off, is to still use GraphQL, but just persist all the data to Vuex and then do something with it at the end of the day. But I'm here to tell you, there is a better way. And that is with Apollo. And so Apollo is essentially this kind of a little bit of a magic library that's managing GraphQL on the client side. So what Apollo lets us do is, instead of having to do all these separate steps of querying our data and then storing it in a specific way that kind of we can define explicitly, and then adding it to Vuex or whatever our state management is, and then, you know, computing that state somehow and getting some data out of it and then rendering it into our component, Apollo just lets us do the query. So really at the end of the day, we're building applications. All we want to do is fire off a query, get the data, and then do something with it as quickly as possible. And this is what I think Apollo does really well. So instead of messy getters and actions and commits and reducers and all the rest of it that you might be familiar with Redux and Mobx and all these other tools, we simply run our GraphQL query and get our data, and Apollo handles the rest. And I guess the key part of the bit about handles the rest is that Apollo will actually cache our data for us. So if we fire off a GraphQL request for our issues list, Apollo figures out that Apollo's got some smarts around its cache, so it'll cache that result. And if we ever query that result, if we ever run that query again in any part of our application that's connected to our Apollo state, we'll just get back the cache data and we'll actually save ourselves a network request, which in many cases is very desirable from a, I guess, performance and user experience perspective, which I think is pretty damn cool. But Tom, what if I need both? And so this is a big question that we've been struggling with GitLab at GitLab with. So what about the case where we have this kind of to-do style application where we just want to manage some client-side state, but we don't, like, there's no data from the server. We don't actually need to fire any GraphQL requests per se. And so, I mean, GitLab actually has to-do. So this is a reasonable example because they are server-side backed. But if there's a case where we need client-side state to be managed, but also we have this kind of server-side data that we're requesting for, and we need to manage that as well, then you might be tempted to think, okay, well, maybe I should just use Vuex for everything, or my standalone state management tool for everything, because then I can just, once I have the data, I can just do whatever I want with it, and I can kind of define my own way of accessing all this data. But I guess the revelation that I want you to try to walk away with from this talk is that Apollo actually lets you query your cache like it's a GraphQL server. And to save myself kind of adding all these examples to the slides, I thought I would just go through a project that we've been working on my team, which is a plugin for the Figma application. So this is Figma. Hopefully everyone can see this. So Figma is just a design tool. And at GitLab, we wanted to give people a way to upload the designs from Figma into a GitLab issue. And so we created this plugin. And of course, being a new shiny tool, we wanted to use all the cool new things. And of course, GitLab is we want to use GraphQL more and more. And also Apollo is being adopted throughout the company. And so we thought this was a perfect opportunity to really try to leverage all these tools in one and kind of give a proof of concept for the rest of the company. And so, yeah, essentially our goal here is to, we've got this design here, which is just the GitLab logo. And I want to basically get this and put it on a GitLab issue. That's our goal. So that's just a bit of context. So getting really real, I'm going to jump into the code and hopefully I can figure out how to explain this in a way that makes sense. Okay, so as I said, I'll jump back to Figma really quick. Whenever a user makes the selection right like this, we wanted to figure out a way to grab this data, grab this image from Figma and then upload it to GitLab. So essentially, we're making a selection there, right? So there's no server involved here. We've got this Figma application, which has our data. There's no GraphQL server involved, and we just have this selection, and we need to figure out what to do with it. And so instead of we could use Vuex, for example, right? We could get this selection and then put it in Vuex, and then it might even be a bit overkill in this example because we're not using we don't really need this massive state management solution in this case because we don't really have different parts accessing this state. But this is where Apollo really, really shines. So let's see, let me go to, so this one. So here we've got the selection. Figma is basically telling us at some point, don't worry about wherever this happens, but at some point in this application, Figma is telling us what the selection is. And we eventually want to call this set selection mutation. And so this is exactly what we just saw before with the Vuex commits or the Redux set states kind of thing, where we're just adding this data, this selection data, to our Apollo cache in this case. So now that we've set this, we want to access it, right? And maybe you think, okay, we've got state, so I'll just do something like state.selection or state.data.selection, so on and so forth. But what we can actually do is query this with a straight up GraphQL query. So this is a GraphQL query, and it's got an object called selection, and within it, it's got components and frames, just a straight up standard GraphQL query. But it's got this interesting little client at client directive. And what this is telling Apollo is that, okay, there's no GraphQL server involved here, so we're not going to be doing a network request. We're just going to be querying our cache for this query. And so if I head back to this resolvers file, somewhere down here, in fact, it'll be in here actually. So this is the view component. This is the view component for basically the upload screen of this particular Figma plugin. It's obviously Vue, but you can think about it as a React component as well. It's just a self-contained kind of JavaScript component. And you see here, we want the selection data, and I'm just literally passing in this selection query, which is the query from the query here. And what this is just going to give me back the exact data that I put in there, but I'm querying it through GraphQL. So this is all to say that if you imagine a kind of bigger example where you had the need to do what we were doing before. So we were fetching data from the server with GraphQL, and we wanted to store it in our state management tool. But also we had this other use case where we were managing client-side only state. We can actually query the exact same cache, the exact same state with GraphQL. And I think that is kind of the big insight. If it doesn't make sense right now, I totally understand you. It took me a little bit to get my head around this for sure. There's definitely some magic involved with Apollo. But I guess, yeah, my kind of goal here was just to introduce you to the idea that GraphQL and state management and these GraphQL and big applications like this can get quite complex quite quickly with things like Vuex, and tools like Apollo really make that a lot simpler. And so I think that's pretty cool. And so, yeah, if anyone's got questions, I actually don't have the YouTube thing put up, but essentially in wrapping up, I think hopefully I've convinced you that GraphQL is really great for developers. It lets us query, or front-end developers at least, definitely back-end as well, but particularly front-end developers, because we can query the exact data that we want, and we can, it just saves us a lot of time because we don't have to figure out all these different endpoints that we need to use. We just go, here's our query, give me back the data in the shape that I want it. And ultimately that helps our users and it helps the business. GraphQL can fit in with your existing state management approach. If you're using Redux, if you're using Mobx, if you're using React Relay or any of those, and of course Vuex, it can fit in there. But I would argue that Apollo is best because it allows us to really utilize the power of GraphQL and focus in on those GraphQL aspects without worrying about all this other kind of boilerplate that we have to write. And of course, no server, no problem. Like Apollo grants you the power of GraphQL for client-only apps. I think that is pretty awesome. So, thank you so much. I stole this photo off the GitLab team page. I am in the Northern Territory, but I'm really excited to come back to Brisbane soon, and hopefully by the time I come back, we will maybe be in person. Who knows? You can reach me at those links, and yeah, happy to answer any questions and just chat in general. I know it was kind of a last minute talk, but please, if you have any questions or want me to talk about anything, I would love to.
That's great. Thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions here. So let's just start reading them out a little bit. Everyone else on the stream, please kick in some more questions. Hey, there we go. So somebody just jumped on. So yeah, feel free to keep asking questions as we go through and answer them, and we'll keep going through them in order. So the very first one that got submitted there was, what adoption do you see with your customers? Are they using GraphQL or traditional REST APIs? So I guess that's in respect to consuming the GitLab APIs.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Look, the GraphQL adoption for our customers, I think, has been really good. I don't have any particular numbers to share. I'm sure they would be available, but yeah, our GraphQL, like we've recently, or at least pre-COVID, really staffed up in the GraphQL aspect, and the kind of, it's an iterative approach to build these APIs and to really flesh out the GraphQL side. And I think, like, honestly, a lot of GitLab, if not most of GitLab at this point, is accessible via GraphQL. And yeah, I think that's really all I can say about that.
Nice. Cool. I'll mark that one as answered. So when you say your cache is queryable, is that state cache or cache of GraphQL? I guess they're wondering what data that is. And
yeah, good question.
Who owns that?
Exactly. I should have probably clarified that a little bit. So I'm talking about the state cache in this in this case. So yeah, I mean, the most basic example is like, think if you just have a plain old JavaScript object, and that's what I'm talking about. So, you know, if the example that I gave, if we're querying for our issues, then we just want to hold them in JavaScript world somewhere so that different parts of our application can use it. Yeah.
That makes sense. The next one there was, is Apollo shipping a state manager? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because like so Apollo, it's in many ways like marketed as just this tool that you kind of use to consume your GraphQL API. And I guess that's kind of what it is. But I think the real power of it is actually the cache. And yeah, it's kind of tricky because I guess these more boutique state management tools like Redux and Vuex and things, they've kind of transformed our worldview into thinking that, you know, we should be doing all of our data flow in a unidirectional way, so everything's kind of easy to track and we can really figure out where our data is going and who's accessing it, and also just giving us kind of ways to think about these things. And Apollo just basically says, just think about your application in terms of the data that you want, and we'll handle the rest. And I think, yeah, again, it is a hard point to get across, but I think the magic comes when you start playing with it. So I definitely encourage you to have a play, and you know, there's plenty of open source GraphQL APIs out there that you can tinker with and see what you can do. So yeah, definitely recommend that.
That's cool. Do you recommend any particular starter projects? Something you found that was easy to kind of crack open and build into as a good learning tool?
I mean, you could use the GitLab GraphQL API, but there's a really good one. There's actually, I think it's Rick and Morty GraphQL API. So I'm just Googling this. Yeah, so if you go to rickandmortyapi.com rickandmortyapi.com/GraphQL, there's a beautiful GraphQL playground that you can play with, and I guess, I don't know, query for your favorite characters or something. It sounds fun.
That's cool.
Yeah, but I've seen that used in a lot of examples, so I'm guessing it's quite good.
And I'm assuming there's sort of front end stack recipes that you can kind of get in there to get like boilerplates or something like that, like you know, to build a client-side application that connects with Apollo.
Definitely. So Apollo, the documentation is very React centered. And I think a lot of the examples are quite React centered as well. But yeah, I'm sure a quick search of GitHub or probably Google is a good place to start. And it's also worth saying that, yeah, while the Apollo documentation is very React centered, you know, there's libraries that support all the big frameworks. So there's a Vue Apollo library that's kind of gives first class support for Apollo in Vue. I'm sure there's the same thing for Angular. So it's definitely not React and a React only thing.
Yeah, there's a question that actually just came in when you said that, just about that. But I'll come back to that. I'll click that off. Sure. Well, I think you've just answered it. So if it's React centric, how good is the Vue support, etc.? How would you rate it?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because the Vue Apollo library, I'm pretty sure it's maintained by one person. He is a member of the Vue core team.
Okay.
And fortunately for us at GitLab, we also have Vue core team members who are kind of pretty confident in I guess the support of the library. So yeah, I guess use your discretion at your company to as to whether it's good enough for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'd be amazing if there was like a feature matrix that compared all the different like compatibility of feature plugins against Apollo core, and then what the plugin, what the bridge actually supplies. Yeah,
that's a good point. So I guess like everything that I've come across with Apollo is supported in Vue Apollo. So I guess that's a good sign.
Cool.
And like Apollo can be used, like you can just use it straight up. Like you don't need all these extra libraries. You could just use the stock standard Apollo with Vue or Angular, but I guess the kind of wrappers just give more idiomatic approaches for whatever framework you're using.
Yeah, quality of life enhancements.
Exactly.
We've got a good one here from Charlie. Have you migrated big existing apps from using traditional state management libraries to using Apollo? What lessons did you learn?
Really great question. So me personally, I haven't actually been involved directly in writing that code. There's been a lot of areas of GitLab that have gone through that transition. So and a perfect example right now is the boards of GitLab. So as I showed, all the current board code, and of course GitLab's open source, so you can totally just go ahead and look at this code yourself. But the boards list is all the data is queried by GraphQL, and it's all persisted into Vuex right now. But right now there's a big effort to kind of consolidate all that into Apollo, simply because it's just so once you get it all up and running, the time that you save by having these kind of libraries take care of a lot of this stuff for you is just amazing from a business point of view. I guess the challenges that I would see, it's really getting a handle on figuring out a way to iterate in a way that doesn't require you to just do a full rewrite. And that's fortunately quite, it's actually not that hard to do with something like Apollo, because it is, I can imagine you iteratively moving across your state to Apollo, for example. You definitely don't need to do it all in one go. Of course, GitLab has taken the approach, at least in the case of the boards list, of first adopting GraphQL and then adopting Apollo. So that could be one approach that you could kind of imitate in your organization if you needed to.
Cool, good tips there. I'll mark that one off. What would be the best segue? I guess there's one here. How do you go about mixing REST calls to other services?
Okay, let me share my screen real quick. Perfect. Sure. Thank you for that question. Thank you very much for that question. So back in our Figma plugin, let me head over to this resolvers file. And this is probably the best example. So in this, unfortunately, as I said, GitLab is still slowly adding these GraphQL, slowly adding data to its GraphQL server. And so part of issues, there's some data, I forget exactly what it was, but there was a reason that we needed to use the REST issues endpoint for this Figma plugin. But that's totally fine with Apollo. So all we need to do is define this function to fetch our REST issues, right? So we're just literally doing a GET request for whatever it is, api.gitlab.com/issues, and eventually we transform that issue into the type of the GraphQL issue, right? The type of the issue that's defined in GraphQL. And then all we need to do then is add it to Apollo, and then we can literally use it just like it's GraphQL. And as you can see, let me see. Yeah, so let's see. So in this example here, this is the issue query. This is literally what it's doing. So this is we've got a project and we're querying our issues. This is getting a specific issue, but it's just going to pull it out of that Apollo cache. And so that's it's definitely possible to mix your. Let me stop sharing my screen. It's definitely possible to mix your REST calls with your GraphQL calls with Apollo.
Cool, makes sense. All right, let's keep going. There's I think it's best to segue to Charlie's other question. Do you miss anything from Redux style libraries, example in testing or debugging with time travel?
Yeah, I think the time traveling thing is definitely a really big draw card for those traditional approaches. The kind of, for those that aren't familiar, that, because when you're committing state to state management, if it's all in one direction and you kind of have names for all these different, what do you call it? I guess functions that you're applying to this state, you can track exactly what's going on. So there's Chrome extensions that let you see where exactly your data has been added to the state, which is really a really cool thing. Apollo does have its own Chrome extension, which is pretty helpful as well. Yeah, it's hard to say. I really do think that, in a GraphQL application, the benefits of Apollo do outweigh the traditional approach. But of course, I can definitely see it's definitely not a dismissal of traditional state management. And it's just crazy how I'm saying traditional state management, because these things are like already so new, and it feels a bit ridiculous saying traditional, but yeah.
Yep. Yeah, the pace of everything that we're always working with is just ridiculously fast. We've been in this game long enough to realize that, if you spend a year away from everything, you've pretty much got to start looking at everything again and realize, okay, what's the best approach to everything right now again, which is an exciting kind of industry to be in. It's kind of crazy. Okay. How do we control getting live data versus cache? So you're saying everything's part of a cache. Apollo's providing you, I guess, this state managed cache. How do we ensure that we're always forcing the latest data? I think that question is.
Yeah, really good question. Fortunately, Apollo provides us with this mechanism called fetch policies. And so that's literally what it kind of means. There's different policies or different, I guess, policy is probably the best word for how we want to query our data. So for example, there is a, what's it called? I think it's no cache. And that's literally, okay, we're just going to fire over our request. We're going to bypass the cache entirely. We're going to just do a straight up GraphQL request to our server and then repopulate our cache afterwards. And that can be totally fine for specific use cases. But of course, there are other use cases where you might be okay with displaying some outdated data only to have that data updated in the future. And there's a fetch policy for that. So yeah, if you wanted to Google something, just Google Apollo fetch policies, and that'll put you in the right direction.
Awesome. Good tips for everyone there at home. There's a last one in here. What's on your wish list for Apollo client? Hi from Tim at Apollo in Byron Bay.
Oh, wow. Well, hello, Tim. Haven't met you, Tim, but I would love to. Wish list. I guess, yeah, maybe like, I think the developer tooling, I think like it's going back to that question about, what's really great about again, traditional state management tools. What's really great about it? I think just the tooling around it. So the ability to travel back in time and really dig into what's going on, I think is super powerful. And I think Apollo's definitely getting there. Personally, I don't utilize the extension too much, the Chrome extension that is, or the browser extension. But I feel like, I don't know, the Apollo team is continually working on the developer experience, and I know that's a really big focus for them. I hope so, Tim. So yeah, I think improvements in that area will definitely go a long way, just for team adoption in general, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, trying to keep teams abreast of everything that's going on is always important. If they've armed with the right tools to be able to debug and get in there, the adoption is going to be way smoother with everyone involved.
Exactly.
Sounds good. Okay, well, that's the last question. Unless there's anyone wants to jump in here at the last minute, I'm not going to cut anyone off. I'm more than happy to keep the flood open. That's all good. Do you have any like particular parting words that you want to sort of explain about why, you know, I guess the success factor of bringing on Apollo and then, you know, what it's really done for your particular stack or your tech direction, or, you know, what you'd like to see going forward at GitLab with the use of these tools?
Sure thing. I think it really just comes back to, you know, there can be a bit of like setup involved in this stuff. And if you're already, as I said, like GraphQL, it does take a little bit of time to really set those foundations. But yeah, I think just from as you saw, like just from a pure development speed point of view, and also just a developer happiness point of view, it's a really good option, I think, for teams these days. And you know, there's so many tools out there like Apollo, and there's of course other, I guess, alternatives to Apollo that can definitely be leveraged. And yeah, at GitLab, I think it's just a testament to how an approach like this can be successful. Like the kind of pilot for GraphQL at GitLab, I think, started over 2 years ago, and you know, it's really just started to permeate the entire company.
So yeah, wow. Yeah, 2 years ago.
Yeah. So I mean, that's when I think the first kind of GraphQL, I guess, endpoints was started to be implemented, and you know, there's definitely a number of applications throughout GitLab that are entirely running off, you know, GraphQL, Apollo, Vue, which is really great. And yeah, it's just continually being adopted. So I think that's, yeah, it's a testament to how well a setup like that can actually, you know, work out.
Fantastic. Oh, great closing comments there. And we haven't got any new questions in there. So yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks very much. Big virtual applause. Thank you, Tom. we're gonna check that one in there. No, it's the pleasure's all mine. And oh, hey, there is there's another question by Nick. If you had to sneak a parrot through airport security, how would you do it? I don't think it's related, but I like your question. It's all good.
Gee, Nick, put him on the spot. I have no idea how to answer that. If I had to sneak a parrot through airport security, I mean, I guess it depends if it's dead or alive. If it's dead, I know it's quite morbid, but I don't know, probably just back pocket.
I love it. Attempting every question. True trooper. All good, all good. Well, look, since I did such a bang-up job of showing my slides at the start, I'm going to give the abridged version of slides for everyone who wanted to go and have a look at that earlier. If there was anything that they missed, or they're not particularly used to my preamble, if it's their first time with listening to my presentations, let me click some buttons, and hopefully that will work. Hang on, I've clicked buttons. There we go. So hopefully that shows some things. So yep, I said code of conduct. It's super important, and the meetup was really just me trying to say that's where you find buttons in meetup. So there's the link if you're interested in our code of conduct. It's just straight up BrisJS.org. I'm going to highlight this because please submit talks. If you're out there and you're keen, it's always it's my main thing that I'm absolutely you know, desperate to try and make sure everyone keeps supporting, because that's what keeps BrisJS alive. You know, the sponsors have been instrumental in that kind of stuff and helping our growth as well, and keeping us running, you know, during COVID and doing everything virtual now that we are. You know, as we keep going forward, that's going to be very useful. But speakers are always the lifeblood of every meetup and community. So thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. That's the link to the GitHub issues if you need that one. There are socials through here. You can pause at any point for these. I'm going to go through real quick. BrisJS.org, the job board, and our sponsors. So feel free to follow that link or check out the job board for that particular position. Here's the folks at Wallaby. Thanks again, guys. You have been instrumental in giving away licenses and helping our developers. So if you're not aware of who they are, what they do, please go check out wallabys.com and quokka.js.com because they are freaking cool. They have some awesome videos demonstrating their products. So thanks very much for that. And that brings us to said final slide. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. And everyone's giving like the little virtual claps and everything else on the stream as well. So thanks again, Tom. And the Slido is quiet. Don't forget, everyone, that there is that giveaway. I've put a question up there. I will read it out because why not? What does Apollo bridge or make easy in the stack? That's the question you've got to answer after you've learned and listened from Tom's fantastic presenting. So provide your full name and email in each of those answers on the Slido page. And I'm going to leave that up all night, and we'll see who gets in for a chance to win. All right. Thanks very much, and see you everyone at home. And we'll catch you next month. There's only one left as December meetup. And then we're going to have a break in January and let everyone enjoy their new year and come back fresh and full of energy for February to kick off 2021. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.